Starting off in our number 10 spot, we have Leslie. Leslie was a 19-year-old student who was attending college in Hartford when she encountered the Warrens. Leslie came from quite a well-off New York family, but in the end she came to the Warrens for help because she was experiencing these unexplainable bouts of depression and anger, and she wanted to see them resolved. She actually, in the beginning, only met with Ed, and when she did, she explained to him that she had previously called upon demons and even the devil himself in order to help her win the love of a boy back home. Apparently, this worked. She had won the boy, and now Satan was on the way to claim her soul, which is why she needed the help of the Warrens before it became too late.
Number 9. The Smurl Haunting. Jack and Janet Smurl sound like they should be like the leading couple of a comedy featuring Jennifer Aniston and Jason Sudeikis. But of course, wrong list. The plight of the couple attracted the attention of Ed and Lorraine Warren after a series of dark and ominous events struck, of course. In the 1970s, the family started experiencing shocking technical mishaps like their TV bursting into flames and toilets flushing by themselves. I know, do ghosts poop? Apparently. At first, they didn't think anything of it, but then the knocking started, in a peculiar pattern of 3 followed by terrible sudden odors, making the Smurls feel ill. The strange noises and smells were swiftly followed by sightings, and thus entered the Warrens. The Warrens discovered a presence of 3 separate demons, and despite 3 exorcisms, the family reported the return of the demons until finally they let go 15 years later. Number 8. The Haunting in Connecticut. The mortuary turned home for the Snedeker family in Southington, Connecticut definitely created the perfect breeding grounds for a scary story, one that left even the Warrens uneasy in their skin. First off, moving into a mortuary? No thank you. In the 1980s, the Warrens took on the case of Carmen and Al Snedeker, who were being tormented by a series of restless spirits and demons. So in this case, it's not just one, but many that they feared. The family reported the smell of rotted flesh lingering in the house because, I don't know, it was a mortuary, and that the taps would turn red out of nowhere. The eldest son was plagued by visions of ghosts, and both Carmen and Al reported being sodomized by the ghosts. It's a very specific activity. Which led to the Warrens making the discovery that whoever the morticians were, their activities were not always professional, if you get my drift. I don't know what's worse, the demons themselves or like the people who used to live there. Ugh. Can't handle that. This was one of their most confusing cases and remains under scrutiny to this day, but the Warrens knew whatever it was had to be exorcised. But the question is, was it really, or is it just hiding out until someone else comes along? Number 7. The Enfield Haunting. I don't know what it is with the 70s, man. It just seems like so much weird stuff happened. We had serial killers. It's nuts. But it just seems like it's one of the strangest times in history, what with violent killers and violent hauntings. The Enfield Haunting took place in Brimstown, England, and remains one of the more boggling cases the Warrens worked on. Peggy Hodgson and her family claimed to have seen furniture and toys being thrown and moved by unknown forces in their homes. They even claimed that violent voices were heard and that their children were levitating in the air. They caught the photo of the girls levitating when the investigators set up a wired control camera into the room, which periodically caught images throughout the night. Whatever it was, the Warrens knew there was a demonic entity within the house and immediately set to work. Number 6. The Perron family case. The Perron family lived in the old Arnold estate, which inspired the scariest film I have ever seen personally, because if you've watched me on Central Dark, you know how low my tolerance is. But anyway, it's still awful. Yeah, you know it, you've heard of it. 8 generations of families lived and died in the old house and apparently never wanted to leave, or never could. When the Perron family moved in the 1970s, the advice they got was to leave the lights on always. Why didn't you leave then? I don't know. I don't know how that didn't send them running for the hills. The house had been rife with tragedy, but one of the 3 people who took their own lives was an alleged Satanist whose activity was responsible for the possession of the house. Her name was Bathsheba Sherman, who became a demon that Lorraine will never forget. The demon would physically attack the daughters of the Perron family, with one reportedly seeing a floating head screaming and retching at her. Ugh, I almost didn't say her name, but I did, so we'll see what happens to me now. Number 5. The Shadow Doll. The Shadow Doll is literally the doll of your nightmares. The shadow doll comes from unknown origins but was kept in the Warrens Museum for safekeeping. But what we do know was that it was used for satanic rituals and that the thing is doused in black magic and contains human and animal bones. Whatever possesses this thing had the Warrens take it into their possession to ensure that it caused harm to no one else. Legend has it that if you take a picture of the doll, it will possess your nightmares. But it won't just be any nightmare. It will be the most terrifying you've ever experienced, and some have even suffered heart attacks from them. I know what you're thinking. Why didn't they just burn the thing? Well, what's more dangerous? A demon you can see right in front of you, or one free to wander wherever it chooses? Honestly, I take the spider approach with this. If you see the spider, you know where the spider is, you're good. As soon as the spider disappears, burn your house down. Number 4, Valak. This one is a little controversial because was it just made up for the films? We don't know. Valak is a real demon mentioned in the Lesser Key of Solomon that was introduced into the Conjuring series of films. Though her direct involvement with Lorraine and Ed is under debate, Lorraine's belief in the demon was very strong. Valak is referred to as the Great President of Hell and usually chooses to appear as a small winged, two-headed creature thing resembling a child. Valak is said to command 30 legions of demons and in the film became the leading arch nemesis of the Warrens. We'll mention Borley Church in a second, but Valak was portrayed as a nun. But there is some speculation that says that they may have actually encountered him throughout some of their worst cases. Lorraine often said that she encountered a black, shadowy vision of a dark entity whenever she wasn't working on a case and believed that she was being followed by something she couldn't explain. Want to know more? Stay tuned until the end of the video and make sure to like and subscribe while we're here. Number 3, Borley Church relates to Valak. We'll talk about this in a second. The grim history of Borley Church is the perfect setting for a horror film. The land upon which it is built used to be the home to a 14th century monastery where a monk fell in love with a nun at a nearby convent, which led to the monk being hanged and the nun was bricked up alive within the walls of her convent, which sounds pretty friggin' extreme if you ask me. It sounds like evil resided there long before Ed and Lorraine made the trek out to sort out whatever demon lay between its walls. Whoever did that to those two poor people, ooh, that's awful. This case inspired the famous nun apparition, as I mentioned, as the youngest daughter of the family who settled there reported seeing her figure. She was also pushed and slapped hard enough to leave welts behind, and that was just in the 1800s. When Ed and Lorraine visited, they obtained photo evidence of the hauntings. Ed captured the image of a monk leafing through one of the books at the altar, and Lorraine experienced a black entity rush past her. Valak. She remembered feeling an overwhelming sense of evil. A picture revealed later showed that the shadow of a nun was rushing past her, so that's where the image came from. So was it Valak? We don't know. Number 2, the Annabelle doll. You knew. Probably the most famous of the hauntings conquered by the Warrens was the Annabelle doll. It would almost be a crime not to mention it. Dolls are already eerie with their black piercing beady eyes that look like there's nothing there. But in this case, the most terrifying part was the thing behind it. The case dates back to the 1970s when a Raggedy Ann doll was innocently purchased from an antique store for her daughter. Soon the doll began raising alarm when it would change positions in the house, boggling its owners. But when the notes started showing up saying help me and help Lou, then they came home to find it covered in blood and they decided then that they needed to call a professional. The first medium they called in said it was just the spirit of a girl who passed away, but then the owner, Angie's boyfriend, was attacked. Enter the Warrens. They knew the doll was in fact a demon based on the marks of the beast and other encounters. They removed the doll and took it home, vowing not to take the highway, concerned that whatever was within the doll might cause an accident. Indeed, their brakes stalled or failed several times on their way home, putting their life in jeopardy several times. It wasn't until Ed doused the doll in holy water that the problem desisted. The couple was so concerned about the doll that Ed routinely said a prayer over the doll every single night. Alright, number 1, the Amityville horror case. The setting: Amityville, Long Island in 1975. A place rife with satanic manifestations set on driving whoever entered to violent madness. As soon as I even say Amityville, you know where this is going. One of the most famous Warren cases, this haunting continues to land on the conclusion that there are just some things that can't be explained. A year before the Lutzes moved into the suburban home in Long Island, Ronald DeFay Jr. shot and killed the 6 members of his family. So it's no wonder that during the first month of living there, the Lutzes experienced swarms of flies, loud banging noises, disturbing entities, and even levitations. The Lutzes moved out and left all their belongings behind, and George Lutz, the father, an ex-Marine and karate expert, so clearly a tough guy, wouldn't even meet the Warrens at the house. He met them at a Pizza Hut. He was that scared. The Warrens said that this case affected their personal relationship to each other the most out of any case they've worked on. This entity followed the Warrens home the very first day, and Lorraine described being incredibly fearful. There was something she just couldn't explain. To this day, Lorraine says that this is the case that haunts her the most, and said, and I quote, she hoped that this was as close to hell as she would ever get.
Starting off in our number 10 spot, we have The Conjuring. To start off this list today, of course, we have to talk about the case that really started a lot of our more modern interest in Ed and Lorraine cases, and that would be the Conjuring house. The house, which was built in 1736, wasn't anything special and didn't gain its fame until the family of Roger and Carolyn Perron moved in 1971. They claimed to experience terrible things like the smell of rotting flesh, witnessing something levitate in their beds as they slept, and one of the family members even claimed to have been possessed by a spirit. The family, of course, called Ed and Lorraine to come and investigate and hopefully help them out. Once there, the pair claimed that there was in fact a spirit haunting the home, and it was that of Bathsheba Sherman, who is said to have been a witch who previously lived in the house and who was buried in a cemetery nearby. The investigators had to make several trips to the house over the span of a few years, but as of now it is said that the house belongs to new owners who continue to open their doors to paranormal investigators. In our number 9 spot today, we have the Borley Church. This is the story that is behind the inspiration for the terrifying movie The Nun, so buckle up because it's a good one. This story takes place when the Warrens went to Essex in order to investigate claims of the haunted Borley Church. The tales involved ghostly chanting, organ music being heard when no one can be seen playing, as well as the ghosts of both monks and nuns roaming around the area. It is said that these hauntings started because in one of the past lives of the area and the building, it is said that a nun was buried in the walls alive after attempting to run off with a monk. I gotta be honest, if that was me, I'd haunt that place forever too. The Warrens are said to have made a series of visits to Borley, and in regards to their very first visit, Lorraine apparently said that it was a phenomenal experience. She spoke about how there was a reporter who was also there to cover the story, and this reporter was particularly skeptic about the reports. Suddenly, this reporter began feeling ill and was struggling to breathe. Later that night, after listening to a tape recording of the event, it is said that a disembodied female voice could be heard repeating the words, "Hit him, hit him." In our number 8 spot today, we have The Vampire. This story is said to be that of a sort of possession, which I honestly wasn't expecting. It is said that the subject in this case, who isn't named, began to have an interest in the occult because of a sort of curiosity with morbidity and death. This then led to her starting to practice satanic rituals, which, listen, we can all express ourselves how we choose, but just be careful, you know? Because for this woman, these rituals led to a bloodlust. She soon found herself waiting outside of cemeteries and dark places, trying to find a young man to prey upon. She would then bite them, like what you'd expect a vampire to do, but it is said that these bites were only to satisfy her craving and hunger, and that the bites were never serious. I'm just saying, serious injury or not, it's pretty messed up. It is said that during her interview with Ed Warren, the woman confessed to having bitten 16 different people this way. In our number 7 spot today, we have Satan's Harvest. This is the story that is said to be behind the book Satan's Harvest, and it involves someone named Maurice Theriault, who is also known by the nickname Frenchie. He was a farmer, and it is said that he had 2 personalities. One was kind and friendly and warm, his neighbors loved him, some members of his family loved him, but there was another side of him that was dark and cruel and twisted, and this was seen towards specific members of his family. Ed and Lorraine came to investigate, and it is said that chaos ensued. They claimed to see him bleeding from his eyes, they found crosses that would just appear on his body, and even messages written on his back. In our number 6 spot today we have West Point. This story starts out when Ed and Lorraine were called to a military academy in West Point, New York. When the couple arrived, it is said that Lorraine could sense what was going on. She felt the presence of an Irish cook named Molly. She explained that Molly was a bit clumsy and messy, but this wasn't the only presence, however. The officers at the academy would complain about a ghost moving objects around their living quarters. It was later identified as a ghost named Greer, which, after some research, turned out to be quite eerie. This is because it is believed that this ghost might have been that of Lawrence Greer. This man was a Buffalo soldier until it is said that he turned into a killer. Here's the really creepy part though. I mean, as if being a killer isn't creepy enough. It is said that after Greer's trial, there's no record of what happened to him. In our number 5 spot today we have the Ouija board. This story is one that Ed Warren told when he was trying to set an example of how things of the occult and the supernatural certainly are not for amateurs or for the faint of heart. He used this story of a girl who was playing with a Ouija board. You know, how all good supernatural stories start. She asked for proof of a spirit presence and she got a lot more than she bargained for. Warren said, quote, "She got this proof with 2 days and 2 nights of hell." Apparently it started off with the manifestation of a sort of animal form walking on her bed. This then turned physical, and whatever this entity was left her with bruises. It is said that thankfully the mother in the home saw what was happening and she took action. She not only prayed by the girl's bedside, but she also sprinkled holy water. There was a 2-day vigil in which everyone tried to rid the girl of this demonic presence that she had summoned, and thankfully, it worked. In our number 4 spot today we have The Beginning. We talk a lot about the most famous cases of the Warrens, like the ones that inspired the Conjuring movies or Haunting in Connecticut or The Nun, but what we don't really talk about is how the Warrens got into the occult. I mean, most people, especially in their day, don't just wake up and suddenly go, "I think I'm gonna dedicate my life to the paranormal." So something must have happened to pique their interest. Well, apparently for Ed Warren, it started at quite a young age. It is said that Ed realized at only age 5 that his house was haunted. Apparently he witnessed a glowing orb and a terrifying woman's face coming out of his closet. I mean, that would be horrible to see as a grown adult. I can't imagine at that age. But it fully makes sense as to why he later became so interested in the things that he did. Before Ed and Lorraine became the names that they are today, it is said that in order to help the pair get a foot in the door, literally into haunted homes, Ed used his passion for painting. He used this by painting homeowners' pictures of their houses. Clearly, something he did must have worked. In our number 3 spot today we have the Lindley Street haunting. This is a case that the Warrens were involved in back in the 70s. A couple named Gerald and Laura Goodwin had adopted a girl named Marcia a few years prior to this case and the strange occurrences taking place. There were a bunch of weird things that started happening, including furniture moving, seemingly of its own accord, as well as a crucifix flying off the wall, again seemingly by some sort of invisible force. What really drew people into this case specifically, and what made it so sensational, was the number of people who had reputations of being reliable who also claimed to witness these strange occurrences. It is said that some people claimed to even hear Marcia's pet cat speak. One reverend even claimed to see the cat singing Christmas carols in the basement. But let's be honest, while that would be very jarring, that's also one of the funniest things I've ever heard. In our number 2 spot today we have the Antonelli'S. The story of this haunting starts off with Mrs. Antonelli, who in February of 1966 claimed that while everyone else in the house was sleeping, she saw some sort of apparition. She explains that it was a mass of grey mist that had 4 distinct appendages, and she said it was bright and looked as if it was in sort of a bubble. No one, including her own husband, believed the things she had seen until a year later. It was at this point that one day, while Mr. Antonelli was home alone, he suddenly, out of nowhere, heard a quote ungodly scream, and when he looked in the direction that it came from, he saw the stairs in his house, but suddenly they appeared as if they went on forever. He sat down, had a few coffees and cigarettes, like I think anyone would after seeing something like that, and after he thought it was over and he went back to the housework that he was doing, but he certainly was not right. Basically, it said that he put the hammer down down about 7 to 10 feet away from the top of the stairs, and then all of a sudden the hammer came flying down them. He went to grab it, put it down again, and this time it suddenly flew right over his shoulder. It is said that when his family came home, he was still a ghostly white, and this time he had 2 cigarettes in his mouth. From here, it is said that many other family members would go on to also experience very strange and unexplainable occurrences. It is said that for the Warrens, even in their long and full careers, this was one of the most interesting cases that they ever investigated. In our number 1 spot today, we have the theater haunting. Starting in Willimantic, Connecticut, the Warrens went out to check out a theater that was said to have a number of strange apparitions and weird sightings. The manager is said to have been 32 at the time, and he had also recently started working there when he saw the figure of a woman late one night after he had already closed down the theater. He saw the same figure the following night, and this led him to confide in one of the employees who had been there for years about what he was witnessing. This is when the employee said that from the balcony one night he had seen 2 actors in a Shakespearean dress. One of them fell exclaiming, "They've killed me," and then all 3 of them disappeared. This wasn't the only employee either. The janitor also experienced strange happenings and sometimes even heard footsteps. The Warrens decided to conduct a seance in the theater. Ed apparently reported that, quote, "The girl whom the manager had seen came to us and explained she had been murdered after she witnessed the killing of a man. The spirit said she knew she was dead, but she was afraid to, quote, pass over to death because, quote, they were waiting for her." There was of course a medium present at the seance, and it is said that this medium called upon spirit guides to help the girl, but she refused. The Warrens left this case saying that the girl's spirit was still earthbound and that she remained in that theater. I wonder if she's still there. Does anyone know?
Number 10. The Devil Made Me Do It. In 1981, 19-year-old Arn Cheyenne Johnson sparked controversy far and wide for a crime he wasn't behind, or so we think. While arguing with Alan Bono over Johnson's girlfriend, Arn stabbed Bono, resulting in the man's death. When police arrived, Arn claimed that the devil made him do it. When the words "the devil made me do it" came from his mouth, it sent the world into controversy. Apparently, Arn was possessed by a demon that had not been vanquished by the Warrens at all. Ed and Lorraine had worked with his family a year prior when Arn's girlfriend's brother David was possessed by not 1, not 2, but 43 demons. In order to save him, Arn commanded the demons to enter him instead, so when his dark deed finally occurred, Ed and Lorraine flew to his defense. The Warrens stated that at the time of the exorcism, and I quote, "Johnson leapt up and cried to the demon, 'Come into me, I'll fight you, come into me.' But from that time on, he was possessed." The Paranormal Society was split in half, but Johnson's team was committed. The court had defended acts of God in the past, like a lightning strike to a tree hits a car, you know what I mean? And now it was time to defend accounts of the devil. But despite what you believe, it wasn't enough, and Johnson received a maximum sentence but was released after good behavior just 4 years later. But still, the fact that these demons were never truly vanquished left the Warrens terrified that this might be the case elsewhere.
In our number 9 spot today, we have Annabelle. Many of us are likely quite familiar with Annabelle due to the movies made about the haunted doll. As it turns out though, they truly are more than just movies, as the real story is said to have taken place in the 1960s. This is at least when Ed and Lorraine began to get involved with the doll. In 1968, 2 roommates claimed that the Raggedy Ann doll that was gifted to one of them by their mother had become possessed by the spirit of a young girl named Annabelle Higgins. After further investigation by the pair, the Warrens explained that the doll was being manipulated by an inhuman presence, and they knew that the roommates would not be able to keep the doll without fearing for their safety. This is what led to the pair taking the doll and placing it in their occult museum. In our number 8 spot today, we have Amityville. One of the cases that is perhaps the most famous of Ed and Lorraine's is that of the Amityville haunting. In the 1970s, couple George and Kathy Lutz contacted the paranormal pair because they claimed that their house was haunted by some sort of violent demonic presence. They said that this presence was so intense it forced them to have to leave their home. Considering the dark history this home had just before the couple had moved in, it wasn't necessarily a stretch to believe that the house was haunted by some sort of evil spirit. In the end, the Warrens investigated the home and backed up claims that the Lutz had, which is part of the reason why this case ended up launching its own multi-million-dollar franchise afterwards. In our number 7 spot today, we have the Enfield poltergeist. In 1977, the Warrens Warrens were called to Enfield, which is said to be a North London suburb, over reports of some poltergeist activity. Many people claimed that the reports of the hauntings were a hoax, but when the Warrens conducted their investigations, they became convinced that the hauntings were a result of demonic possession. The claims said that the house had furniture that moved on its own, there were disembodied voices being heard throughout the halls, and just general haunting things that nobody would want in their home. In the end, this case was so famous, it's actually what went on to inspire the story that was seen in The Conjuring 2. In our number 6 spot today, we have The Devil Made Me Do It. This is the Ed and Lorraine Warren story that is behind the 2021 Conjuring movie. We've got a lot of fucking Conjuring movies on this list. In 1981, Arn Johnson was accused of taking the life of his landlord, Alan Bono. Ed and Lorraine had been called to the house prior to this taking place because the family believed that the younger brother of Arn's fiance had been possessed by a demon, but when the paranormal investigations began, Ed and Lorraine claimed that Arn was also possessed by some sort of demon. The trial of Alan's killing ended up marking a point in time, as it was the first time demonic possession was used as a not guilty plea. In this case, it was unsuccessful, but it went on to be one of the most historic cases of Ed and Lorraine's. In our number 5 spot today, we have The Werewolf. Okay, I'll be honest, this is one of the more controversial Ed and Lorraine cases, but still, we had to talk about it. Ed and Lorraine claimed that they were able to exorcise the angry spirit of a werewolf from a man named Bill Ramsey, who is said to have turned into a sort of wolf man. The Warrens did not perform exorcisms themselves, so of course they needed to get some help from priests as well, but they claimed that the treatment worked. Lorraine explained that she saw Ramsey's case on TV and just felt like she could help him. She even claimed to have a video of this guy transforming into the werewolf creature, but conveniently never released it to the public. The Warrens were so involved in this case that they brought Bill from England back to Connecticut in order to be exorcised by a bishop that they knew and trusted. In our number 4 spot today, we have the Union Cemetery. The Union Cemetery in Easton, Connecticut is known as one of the most haunted cemeteries in the United States, which definitely says a lot. The most famous of all of its hauntings is a presence that is often referred to as the White Lady. There are many people who have experienced this ghostly presence, and many people have seen her walking in front of their cars as they drive near the cemetery. That is all exactly why, in 1990, the Warrens decided to experience it for themselves when they set up their cameras in this haunted location. It is said that just after 2:40 a.m. they heard the sound of weeping, and a paranormal figure began to move several feet in their direction. It is said that as they witnessed this, Ed tried to slowly approach her, but she suddenly vanished just as quickly as she had appeared. In our number 3 spot today, we have the Smurl house. In August of 1973, the Smurl family had moved into a new home in West Pittston, Pennsylvania, but things quickly took quite a dark turn. The family began to claim that their new home was possessed by some sort of a demon that caused loud noises and bad odors, and whatever this entity was, it was doing some really violent things to the family, as well as to their pet dog. This went on for years before they decided to call in the pros. Of course, Ed and Lorraine were on the case. According to Ed, there was a demon that inhabited the home, and it was very powerful. It had the ability to shake mirrors and other items of furniture, and they began trying to persuade it to leave by playing religious music and praying. Apparently, the Warrens, while in the home, witnessed a drop in temperature, which was followed by the formation of a sort of dark mass. There was another instance where they claimed they saw the demon leave a message on a mirror that read, "Get out." In our number 2 spot today, we have The Haunting in Connecticut. If you've ever seen or read The Haunting in Connecticut, this is a home and a story that you might be a little familiar with. In 1986, the Snedeker family moved into a new rental home that at one time had previously been a funeral home. In the basement, the family found some less than welcoming items that were left from the home's previous life. Shortly after moving in, however, their discoveries would become more gruesome as they began to have reports of evil coming from the house. These included attacks on the family members, seeing apparitions, and they even explained violent personality changes from one of the family members. When Ed and Lorraine investigated the house, they were able to confirm that it was in fact haunted. It is said that one of the most frightening things that took place in the house, aside from the rumors of possession, was one day when a family member was mopping the floor and all of a sudden the water suddenly turned blood red. In our number 1 spot today, we have the Donovan family. In the early 1970s, the Warrens were called to the home of the Donovan family, and when they arrived, they found them all terrified. They witnessed loud pounding and other inhuman noises coming from inside of the walls. The wallpaper was peeling, and the water was running red. The Warrens began their investigation, and this included asking them questions to try and find out if there was a source for the haunting, such as a recently passed away family member or some kind of new secondhand item that they had inherited. Through this questioning, it was revealed that one member of the family had used a Ouija board and ended up contacting someone who said that they had died in the neighborhood 10 years earlier. The Warrens knew it was time for them to call a priest because they believed that the entity that had been reached through the Ouija board was actually a demon that was just posing as the person who had passed away. Following an exorcism, it is said that things in the home slowly returned to normal, but the events stayed with the entire family. One member who witnessed the hauntings and the exorcism said, quote, "I nor anyone else in my family have ever before witnessed anything so weird and terrifying."